Hi everyone, so today I'm going to tell you all about how to take your first draft and turn it into an excellent book. So don't forget to subscribe and hit the little bell because of that. So NaNoWriMo ended obviously on the 30th of November and it's now the 18th of December. So I'm a little bit late with this, but I've been moving house, hence the new setup. So that's my excuse. And I thought I would do a quick video about editing. I thought it might be interesting to start with Before I Go to Sleep and how I edited that. Because I think it sometimes surprises people to learn that the first draft of Before I Go to Sleep, I would say maybe 50% of it actually survived the edit. So when I thought I'd finished the book, which was maybe 6 months after starting writing it, I'd actually only written half of it. And I would say of the rest of the material in the finished book, probably 25% of it was significantly edited from the material I'd written in the first draft, and 25% of it was brand new. So hopefully that gives you an idea of just how much work there is still to do, even when you finish the first draft. Although you should take that as a positive, really, because no matter how rubbish your first draft, you can always do the work to improve it. So how do you go about doing that? I think if you can, the first thing to do is actually to put the book to one side for as long as you can. Because I think the first thing you need to do when you're editing is to read it as a reader would, not as the person who wrote it. I think it's really important to distance yourself from the material, because otherwise you can get too emotionally attached to it. There might be a particular passage or chapter or paragraph even that you remember writing, and you might be thinking, oh, I remember that day everything was going really well and the words were flowing and the birds were tweeting and everything like that, and I don't want to get rid of it because it's just brilliant. But actually you need to be able to look beyond all of that and really critically evaluate every single line, every single word, to see whether it actually deserves to be in the finished book. And I think if you're too close to material, that can be really hard to do. So put it aside for as long as you can, I would say, is my first piece of advice, really. With Before I Go to Sleep, if I remember rightly, I finished the draft of that in the August, and I managed to last until October before I began to edit it seriously. So that was probably about 6 weeks. The idea of sort of like finishing a draft on November the 30th and starting the edit on December the 1st, I mean, it can work, I suppose. And one thing I'm really interested in is if you've got any comments about it, if you do things differently or you disagree with anything I'm saying, then do just let me know in the comments, because that'd be really interesting. So when you're ready to return to the book and do the edit, the first thing, fairly obviously, I suppose, is to read it. But actually, again, read it as a reader would, without a red pen. I would read a hard copy, not on a computer screen, so you're not tempted to make changes. Because you're really, I think, reading it to get the overall picture of what the book is and what you've done, and to get a sense of what works and what doesn't work. But you're not at this stage going into the specifics. I would recommend printing it out, taking it to a different place, even just a different room from the one that you wrote it in can help, I think, just to give you that bit of distance. And just read it in as few sittings as you can. And then at the end of that reading, just make very, very general notes about it. And then, of course, it's time to go in a bit deeper. And now I think is when I would recommend reading it again a bit more slowly, and this time with a pen in your hand, making notes. At this stage, there's not a lot of point in editing specific words or moving lines around or changing things on that kind of micro level, because you're really at this point looking at structure and whether the book hangs together and flows and makes sense. And you might also be looking at character, whether things are consistent, whether there's too much coincidence, whether a character's desires are explicit enough or thought through. But changing specific words at this point, or the order of sentences, is probably pretty pointless. So I would make very general notes on the page at this point, and then begin to restructure the book. I think you have to be prepared to completely dismantle it and put it together in a different way. It really is true that you can't get too attached to anything. And I remember with Before I Go to Sleep, there were whole sections that I really didn't want to get rid of because I thought there was some really great writing in there, or some moments that I was really proud of and pleased with. But sooner or later, you have to be prepared to get rid of some great material because it just doesn't service the book as a whole. And the quicker you can get used to that idea, I think the better. And I remember with Before I Go to Sleep, every single time I was struggling over an edit, every single time something wasn't working and I was trying to find a way of making it work, almost every single time at least, the book was better for just deleting it. And then I think after that, it's just a case of going over and over the material again, smoothing it down, with each pass, you're becoming slightly less macro and looking at a more micro level until eventually you really are looking at it on a paragraph level, a sentence level, and then even a word level. I think it's just a case of going over it and over it. And then you know when a book is done, when it begins to resist editing, you're starting to look for things to change. I mean, Mark Billingham had a really great way of putting it, which is to say that you know a book is done when it doesn't rattle. And I remember the first time he said that to me on my course, I didn't really know what he meant. But during the course of editing before I go to sleep, it became apparent what he meant. It's this kind of sense you get, the niggling things that you know in the back of your mind aren't really working and need a bit more attention. They diminish until eventually you're left thinking, actually, I can't really think of a particular section of the book that doesn't work or that needs attention. And that's really the book telling you that it's kind of done. And it might be worth then sort of putting it away again for a while, going and doing something completely different, not thinking about it if possible, and trying to read it again as a reader would and seeing how the experience is different this time. So that's editing really. It's a bit of a sort of 5-minute run through. But hopefully it gives you an idea of how much work is involved. For me, the biggest amount of work is in the edit. The writing of the first draft is very much just getting the material on the page, getting something to work with, and then the work happens in the next stage. And it's something that can't be rushed. And actually, I think it's something I've grown to love more and more. With each successive book, I've enjoyed the editing stage more. So a first draft doesn't really feel as important in many ways. It feels much more fun and experimental. So that's editing. As I said earlier, not everyone does it the same way. So I'll be fascinated to know how you do it or what thoughts you may have about what I've said. But I hope you've enjoyed this and I'll see you again soon.